Beneath the indifferent gaze of the waxing moon, a single snowflake traced the curve of her cheek like a tear frozen in time. Alara's breath came in shallow gasps, the iron chains biting into her wrists as the wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Frostfang Mountains. The air was a blade, sharp and unrelenting, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant smoke from the pyres that had claimed her kin. She stood in the judgment chamber of Eldridge Keep, a cavernous hall carved from ice-veined stone, where torches flickered like dying stars against walls that wept with perpetual frost. The Alpha Council loomed before her, their fur-lined cloaks heavy with the authority of the pack, eyes gleaming with the cold calculation of wolves, scenting weakness. She was no longer Alara of the Silver Hollow Pack, just the condemned Omega, marked for death at dawn. Rejection had come swiftly, a ritual as ancient as the moon's pull. The Alpha's mate, a she-wolf of noble blood, had whispered poison into the ears of the elders, Alara's supposed crime. A fleeting glance at the pack's future alpha during the lunar rite, an accusation woven from jealousy and fear. But deeper still lay the truth she dared not voice. Her blood sang with the old magic, the kind that alphas feared, for it whispered of paths untrodden and fates unbound. The High Elder Thorn stepped forward, his voice a rumble like grinding glaciers. By the laws of the goddess, you are cast out. Your presence taints the bloodline, invites chaos to our borders. His words hung in the air, heavy as the snow gathering on the chamber's threshold. Ilara's heart pounded, a wild drum against her ribs, but she lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with eyes the color of storm-tossed seas. Inside, doubt gnawed like frostbite. Had she truly glimpsed something forbidden in that glance? Or was it merely the loneliness of an Omega forever on the fringes? The symbol of her fall dangled from her neck, a silver pendant etched with the crescent moon, its chain stained with a drop of her own blood from the marking ceremony gone awry. It had been her mother's, a relic from the days when Omegas were seers, not servants. Now it felt like a noose, warm against her chilled skin where her blood had seeped in, a crimson thread binding her to a destiny she could not yet see. As the guards unchained her, the metal clanged against the stone floor, echoing her isolation. They dragged her toward the outer gates, where the blizzard waited like an executioner. Outside, the world was a monochrome fury. Snow whipped across the frozen tundra, blurring the line between earth and sky. Alara's bare feet sank into the drifts, each step a needle of pain that shot up her legs, but she refused to cry out. The pack's howls faded behind her, a chorus of dismissal that twisted in her gut like a knife. Banished to die, they said, left for the wilds to claim her, as if she were no more than chaff in the wind. Yet as the keep's silhouette vanished into the white veil, a strange calm settled over her. The moon above, full and luminous, seemed to watch, its light piercing the storm like a promise unspoken. She stumbled onward, the pendant bouncing against her chest, its bloodied edge a constant reminder of the lifeblood spilled in her name. The cold seeped into her bones, numbing the ache of betrayal, but not the fire of questions burning within. Why her? Why now, when whispers of war stirred from the southern clans, alphas clashing over territories scarred by old feuds? Alara had heard the tales, kings falling to treachery, their thrones stained with the blood of the innocent. Was her exile part of some greater game? A sacrifice to appease the spirits of unrest? Hours blurred into a haze of endurance. The wind carried distant weavos, not of her pack, but something wilder, untamed. She collapsed against a rocky outcrop, her body trembling, fingers tracing the pendant's curve. The blood within it had dried to a dark rust, yet it pulsed faintly, as if alive, syncing with the rhythm of her faltering breath. In the silence between gusts, she whispered to the moon, "If you are merciful, goddess, show me a path." No answer came, only the relentless fall of snow, burying her tracks as if she had never existed. but existence clung to her like the frost on her lashes. Memories surfaced unbidden. The warmth of the pack's hearth, now forever lost. The sting of the Alpha's rejection, his eyes averted as the sentence was passed. He had been her betrothed once, promised in the haze of youth, until ambition reshaped him into a shadow of duty. Ilara curled tighter, the cold a companion more faithful than any wolf. Strength, she thought, was not in claw or fang, but in the quiet choice to rise again, even as darkness crept at the edges of her vision. Dawn approached, a pale threat on the horizon, when the first tremor shook the ground. Not thunder, but footsteps, heavy, deliberate, cutting through the storm. Ilara's senses sharpened, the Omega instinct flaring despite her exhaustion. A shadow emerged from the swirling white, tall and cloaked in midnight fur, eyes like embers in the gloom. He was no wanderer of the wilds. The scent of royalty clung to him, mingled with the metallic tang of blood and sorrow. An Alpha, marked by scars unseen, his presence a storm unto itself. She froze, the pendant warming against her skin as if in warning or welcome. Who was he, this intruder in her exile? And why did the moon seem to lean closer, as if the judgment chamber's echoes had followed her into the wild? The stranger's silhouette sharpened against the blizzard's fury, his cloak a tattered banner of black fur whipping like the wings of a raven in torment. Ilara's pulse thundered in her ears, drowning the wind's ceaseless lament as he drew nearer, each step a deliberate carve through the snow, leaving prints-like wounds in the pristine white. The air thickened with his scent, pine and iron, the raw edge of blood freshly spilled, undercut by something deeper, a melancholy that tugged at her Omega instincts like an unseen tether. She pressed back against the rock, the stone's chill seeping through her threadbare shift, but her eyes locked on his, those embers glowing with a fire that pierced the storm's veil. He halted mere paces away, his breath clouding the air in ragged bursts, revealing the broad chest heaving beneath the cloak. Up close, he was no mere Alpha of the wilds. The silver torque around his neck gleamed with the insignia of a fallen crown, etched with the ancient runes of the northern realms. King Alaric, she realized with a jolt that stole her breath. Whispers of his name had echoed even in the Silver Hollow. Tales of a ruler who had led his pack to victory against the southern invaders, only to be haunted by the ghosts of those he could not save. His face, shadowed by a hood frayed at the edges, bore the weight of that legacy. Jaw set like forged steel, but eyes shadowed with a guilt that mirrored her own exile's ache. Who dares trespass in these forsaken wilds? His voice was a low growl, resonant as the rumble of avalanches deep in the mountains, yet laced with exhaustion. He scanned the horizon as if expecting pursuers, before his gaze settled fully on her. The pendant at her throat warmed again, an insistent pulse against her skin, its bloodied crescent seeming to hum in response to his nearness. Fear coiled in her belly, sharp as the frost nipping her toes. But curiosity bloomed alongside it, a forbidden spark, drawing her toward the danger he embodied. Ilara swallowed, her throat raw from the cold. "I am no trespasser," she whispered, voice barely rising above the wind's howl. "This wilderness claims me as its own now, banished, left to the dawn's mercy." She didn't know why she spoke. Survival demanded silence, flight. Yet something in his stance, the subtle slump of shoulders burdened by invisible chains, stirred an empathy she could not deny. He was wounded, she saw it then, a gash across his forearm, seeping crimson through the torn leather, staining the snow at his feet like spilled secrets. Alaric's eyes narrowed, the ember glow flickering with recognition, or perhaps suspicion. He stepped closer, the snow crunching under his boots, and the air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Up close, the scars on his hands told stories of battles fought not just with claw and fang, but with the sharper blade of betrayal. "An Omega," he murmured, more to himself than to her, his nostrils flaring as he inhaled her scent. wildflowers crushed underfoot, mingled with the faint, metallic tang of her fear. Alone in the storm, the packs grow crueler with each moon. She bristled at the word, the instinctive pull toward him warring with the raw sting of her rejection. "Cruelty is their throne," she replied, her voice gaining strength from the defiance flickering in her chest. The pendant shifted with her quickened breath, its warmth spreading like liquid fire through her veins, urging her to see beyond the fear. But denial surged hot on its heels. What connection could bloom here between a condemned outcast and a king in flight? He was everything her pack had warned against, power incarnate, a force that could shatter her fragile resolve. A distant uivo pierced the gale, low and urgent, snapping his head toward the sound. Alaric's hand went to the hilt of the sword at his belt, its blade etched with lunar phases that caught the moon's pale light. "They're coming," he said, the words clipped, laced with the weight of secrets. "My brother's hunters. Treachery festers in the heart of my realm. He seeks the crown through my blood." His gaze returned to her, assessing, not with the cold judgment of her elders, but with a haunted curiosity that mirrored her own. The instinct to flee warred with an inexplicable urge to aid him, to touch the wound on his arm and staunch the flow that mirrored the blood in her pendant. Ilara rose unsteadily, legs numb from the cold, the snow clinging to her like a shroud. "Then run, King of Shadows. This storm devours the weak." But even as she said it, her body betrayed her, leaning toward his warmth, the air between them humming with a denied pull. Fear twisted sharper. What if he saw her as prey, or worse, a pawn in his royal games? Yet curiosity held her rooted, the pendant's pulse syncing with the distant howls, as if the moon itself wove their fates together. He hesitated, the wind tearing at his cloak, revealing the intricate scars across his chest, marks of old oaths broken, duties unfulfilled. Guilt etched his features, a melancholy that softened the alpha's edge, making him seem less conqueror and more a soul adrift. "The weak do not stand in blizzards and live," he countered, his voice softening, almost reluctant. "What drives you to this edge, Omega? A crime or a curse?" She touched the pendant instinctively, its bloodied chain a talisman against the vulnerability his question unearthed. The connection flickered, instinctive and raw, born of shared isolation under the moon's unblinking eye. But she pushed it down, rationalizing it as survival's illusion. No alpha, not even a broken king, could offer more than fleeting shelter. "Both," she admitted, the word hanging like frost in the air. The howls grew nearer, a chorus of pursuit slicing through the night. Alaric extended a hand, gloved in worn leather, the gesture a bridge across the chasm of their worlds. "Then let the storm witness our defiance. Come with me, if only until the dawn breaks." His eyes held hers, a storm of duty and unspoken longing. The guilt in their depths calling to the curiosity she could no longer ignore. Ilara's heart raced, the pendant burning now, a symbol of paths converging in blood and moonlight. Fear screamed retreat, but the pull was undeniable, a thread of destiny tugging her forward into the unknown. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. Ilara's fingers trembled as she reached for his outstretched hand, the leather glove rough against her chilled skin, a lifeline forged in the storm's unforgiving heart. The pendant at her throat thrummed like a second pulse, its bloodied crescent warming her chest as if the moon's own blood coursed through it, urging her toward this reckless alliance. She let him pull her to her feet, the world tilting in a whirl of snow and shadow, his grip firm yet haunted by the same hesitation that clawed at her resolve. No words passed between them. The howls of the approaching hunters wove their silence into urgency, a symphony of pursuit that drowned all but the instinct to survive. Alaric released her hand but stayed close, his body a shield against the wind's savage bite as they plunged deeper into the blizzard. The Frostfang Mountains rose like ancient sentinels around them, their peaks clawing at the sky, veined with ice that gleamed under the moon's pale scrutiny. He moved with the grace of a predator, schooled in evasion, leading her toward a narrow ravine where jagged rocks formed a natural labyrinth, the snow drifts piling high like forgotten graves. Alara's bare feet bled into the white, each step a crimson imprint that the wind swiftly erased, but the pain was distant, overshadowed by the enigma of the king beside her. Who was he, this alpha whose scent wrapped around her like smoke from a sacred pyre, royal, broken, and inexplicably drawing her in? The ravine narrowed, forcing them shoulder to shoulder, his cloak brushing her arm and sending sparks through her veins. "There," he murmured, voice low as the rumble of hidden thunder, nodding toward a cleft in the rock face, half obscured by an overhang of frozen vines. A cave, shallow but defensible, its mouth exhaling a faint warmth from some geothermal whisper deep within the earth. They slipped inside, the stone walls closing around them like the jaws of a slumbering beast, muffling the storm's roar to a distant lament. Alaric barred the entrance with a fallen boulder, his wounded arm straining, fresh blood seeping through the bandage he hastily tied with a strip from his cloak. The metallic scent filled the air, mingling with the damp earth and the faint, wildflower trace of her own fear sweat. Alara sank against the wall, her body shivering uncontrollably, the shift clinging to her like a second skin soaked in meltwater. The cave's interior was a dim sanctuary, lit only by slivers of moonlight filtering through cracks above, casting silvery patterns on the floor like the goddess's own script. She watched him work, his movements precise despite the pain etching lines across his brow. Empathy stirred unbidden, a soft ache in her chest, for the gash that mirrored her inner wounds, for the guilt that shadowed his eyes like storm clouds over a frozen lake. "Your brother," she said softly, breaking the heavy silence, her voice echoing faintly off the stones. "What treachery drives him to hunt you like a common rogue?" Alaric paused, kneeling to gather brittle twigs and moss from the cave's recesses, his hands steady as he struck flint to steel. Sparks flew, igniting a small fire that bloomed like a hesitant dawn, its flames dancing in hues of gold and crimson against the gray rock. The warmth was a revelation, chasing the frost from her bones, but it illuminated his face too harshly, revealing the scar that bisected his cheek, a mark from some long-ago battle, faded yet fierce. He fed the fire methodically, the crackle underscoring his words. Ambition, laced with the poison of old grudges. "Our father fell to southern blades, and I bore the crown's weight too heavily, they say. Refused to spill more blood for borders drawn in ink and lies. Now he whispers of my weakness to the council, paints me the traitor to claim the throne." His gaze met hers across the flames, the embers reflecting in his eyes, turning guilt into something raw, almost vulnerable. "And you? What sin condemns an Omega to the wild's embrace?" The question hung like smoke, curling around her heart. Ilara's fingers traced the pendant, its chain cool now, the dried blood flaking like autumn leaves under her touch. The fire's heat coaxed sensation back into her limbs, but with it came the flood of memory, the judgment chamber's chill, the elder's unyielding stares, the alpha's averted eyes as her world shattered. "Jealousy cloaked as justice," she replied, her voice steadying in the fire's glow. "A glance misinterpreted, a fear of what I carry within, the old blood, the whispers of paths unseen. They called it chaos, banished me to die so their purity might endure." Denial flickered. She rationalized the pull toward him as mere shared desperation, two exiles forging temporary truce. Yet as the flames popped and hissed, empathy deepened, threading through her like the moon's silver light. His guilt echoed her shame, his flight her fall. Outside, the howls sharpened, circling closer, the hunter's paws churning the snow into a frenzy. Alaric tensed, rising to peer through a crevice, his sword drawn with a whisper of steel on leather. Shadows flitted in the moonlight, wolves' eyes glinting like distant stars fallen to earth. One lunged toward the cave's mouth, sniffing the air, its breath fogging the night. Ilara's instincts surged, the pendant pulsing hot against her skin, and without thought, she scrambled to his side, her hand pressing to the stone beside his. "They sent us," she breathed, fear twisting with a fierce protectiveness she hadn't known she possessed. In that moment, the enemy bound them. Not just his brother's blades, but the world's cruelty, the packs that devoured their own. Alaric's arm brushed hers, a deliberate shield as he growled a warning into the dark, the sound reverberating through the cave like the earth's own defiance. The hunter recoiled, but others pressed, their snarls a chorus of betrayal. Together, they held the line, him with fang and steel, her with whispered pleas to the moon, the pendant's warmth spreading as if channeling some ancient ward. A skirmish erupted at the threshold, claws scraping stone, blood spraying in dark arcs that sizzled on the snow. Alaric struck true, his blade a blur, but a claw raked his side, drawing a hiss of pain. Ilara moved without command, tearing her shift to bind the new wound, her touch gentle amid the chaos, staunching the flow as empathy bloomed into something unbreakable. A bond forged in firelight and shared blood. As the hunters retreated into the storm, their howls fading to wounded cries, silence reclaimed the cave. Alaric slumped beside her, the fire's glow softening his features, the weight of survival etching a quiet intimacy between them. Ilara's heart ached with the realization. In protecting him, she had glimpsed her own strength, the Omega's fire not in submission, but in choice. Yet doubt lingered. A spiritual whisper. What if this refuge was but a fleeting illusion, his royal shadows engulfing her fragile light? The pendant cooled, its bloodied symbol a reminder that redemption demanded more than shelter. It required surrender to the unknown. In the fire's dying embers, she wondered if mercy could bridge their wounds, or if the dawn would demand a steeper price. The embers whispered secrets to the stone, their faint glow casting long shadows that danced like specters across Alaric's weary form. Ilara sat close, the cave's chill seeping back now that the fire's warmth had ebbed, her fingers still stained with his blood from the hasty binding. The air hung heavy with the scent of scorched moss and iron-tanged wounds, a reminder that refuge was but a fragile truce with the night. Her pendant rested against her collarbone, its crescent shape cool once more, the dried blood flaking away like forgotten oaths. She watched him through half-lidded eyes, the king's chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm, each breath a labored testament to the battles etched into his soul. Empathy had woven itself into her bones during the skirmish, transforming fear into a quiet fierceness, but doubt lingered like frost on the cave walls. What price would this bond exact from a condemned Omega? Alaric stirred, his ember eyes opening to meet hers across the dimness. The scar on his cheek caught a sliver of moonlight, silvering it into something almost sacred, a mark of survival rather than defeat. "You fought like one born to the wilds," he said, his voice a low rumble, softened by exhaustion, yet laced with that melancholy that pulled at her like the tide. He shifted, wincing as the fresh bandage pulled taut, and reached for a waterskin from his pack, offering it first. The gesture was small, unkingly, born of a shared vulnerability that chipped at the walls of her denial. She took it, their fingers brushing, his calloused, hers trembling, and drank deeply, the cool liquid chasing the metallic aftertaste of fear from her throat. As she handed it back, a tremor ran through her, not from cold, but from deep within, where the old blood stirred like a awakening beast. The pendant warmed abruptly, its chain heating against her skin as if kissed by an inner flame. Ilara gasped, clutching it, visions flickering at the edges of her sight. Not memories, but fragments of something vast, lunar-touched. Snow-swept plains stretched before her inner eye, bordered by jagged peaks where banners of crimson and silver clashed under a blood moon. Whispers echoed, oaths broken, thrones toppled. A path through the storm revealed only to those who dared the unseen. The cave blurred, the king's face dissolving into the haze, and she saw him there in the vision. Alaric, crowned not in gold, but in frost and fire, standing at a crossroads where betrayal's blade hovered, poised to strike. But a figure stood beside him, cloaked in moonlight, her hand extended, guiding him toward a hidden ravine that led to redemption's hearth. The images shattered as suddenly as they came, leaving her breathless, slumped against the stone. The pendant pulsed once, then stilled, its bloodied etching gleaming faintly in the low light, as if it had drunk from the well of her soul. Ilara's heart thundered, the weight of what had passed through her crashing like an avalanche. This was no mere fancy. It was the gift her pack had feared, the pathfinder's sight, dormant until the moon deemed her ready. Tears pricked her eyes, hot against the chill. Revelation brought not joy, but terror. To see paths was to walk them, to bear their burdens, and in glimpsing his fate entwined with hers, she felt the chains of destiny tighten. Alaric was at her side in an instant, his hand on her shoulder, steadying her as the world righted itself. "What haunts you now, Omega?" he murmured, concern etching deeper lines into his brow, his scent enveloping her like a protective shroud. Pine, blood, and that undercurrent of sorrow that mirrored her own fractured spirit. Up close, the guilt in his eyes was a storm she could drown in, ethical depths questioning every choice that had led him to this exile. He had been a king of duty, she sensed it now, one who had spared lives at the cost of his throne, only to be branded weak by those who craved war's glory. She met his gaze, the words tumbling out in a whisper raw with emotion. A vision. From the old ways. The moon showed me paths, yours, tangled with shadows of betrayal. Your brother's hunters are but the vanguard. Greater treachery brews in the southern halls, a rival alpha weaving alliances to shatter your realm. But there is a way through, hidden in the Frostfang's heart, a temple where the goddess's flame burns eternal. If we reach it. Her voice faltered, the pendant's warmth fading to a dull ache, as if warning of the cost. To reveal this was to bind herself to him, to trade her fragile freedom for a destiny that demanded sacrifice. Love, she realized with a pang, was no gentle bloom but a thorned path, redemption forged in the fire of choice. Alaric's breath caught, his hand tightening on her shoulder, not in command but in awe. The realization dawned in his eyes, embers flaring to life as he pieced the fragments, the pendant's glow, her instinctive ward during the attack, the way her touch had eased his pain beyond mere cloth and pressure. "You are the seer," he breathed, the words reverent, laced with the melancholy of a man long denied hope. The pathfinder of legends, born to Omegas cast aside. My court whispered of such a one, key to unlocking the moon's prophecies, the salve for a king's cursed bloodline. He pulled back slightly, studying her as if seeing her anew, not as exile, but as the thread in fate's weave. Guilt shadowed his wonder. He had hunted such gifts in vain, only to find her in the wilds, drawn by the very curse that haunted him, a lineage tainted by a father's unavenged death, demanding blood for blood. Ilara recoiled inwardly, rationalizing the bond as illusion, a survival's trick under the moon's capricious eye. Yet the vision's truth lingered, visceral as the blood on her hands, stirring a spiritual fire she could no longer deny. "I am no savior," she protested, voice trembling with the weight of it all. "My gift brought only banishment, fear from those who saw chaos in clarity. What if guiding you demands my end? Another sacrifice on the altar of Alpha's wars. The cave seemed to close in, the moonlight slanting sharper, illuminating the ethical chasm. To embrace this was to choose compassion over solitude, to heal his wound at the risk of her own rebirth. He knelt before her, his scarred hand cupping her face gently, thumb tracing the curve of her cheek where frost had lingered. The touch ignited something profound, a romantic ache born of tragedy, tenderness amid the gore of their shared flight. "Then we choose together," he said, his voice a vow etched in the quiet. "Strength is not in crowns or claws, but in mercy's quiet flame. If you are my key, Alara, let me be the lock that guards your light." The air between them hummed with unspoken longing, the pendant bridging their gazes like a blood-sealed pact. Outside, the wind howled anew, carrying echoes of distant weavos, a reminder that refuge was fleeting. Ilara's soul wrestled in the silence. What was destiny, if not the freedom to defy it, or the courage to yield? The revelation had awakened her, but the true judgment loomed. Could an Omega's vision crown a fallen king, or would it consume them both in lunar fire? Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The moon hung low over the Frostfang's jagged spine, its silver light bleeding into the snow like spilled mercury, illuminating the path ahead as a treacherous vein of fate. Ilara's breath fogged the air, each exhale a fragile prayer against the encroaching dawn, as she and Alaric emerged from the cave's shadowed womb. The pendant at her throat thrummed with residual heat from the vision, its bloodied crescent a constant weight, pulling her forward into the unknown. Her legs ached from the night's flight, bare feet raw against the crust of ice, but the revelation had ignited something unyielding within, a fire that warred with the chill of doubt. Beside her, Alaric moved like a specter of his former self, his cloak mended with hasty stitches, the sword at his hip a silent vow. His guilt shadowed every step, a melancholy aura that wrapped around her like the wind's cold fingers, stirring the instinctive bond she still resisted, rationalizing it as the moon's cruel jest. They descended into a narrow valley cradled by sheer cliffs, where the storm had carved frozen sculptures from the rock, twisted spires that whispered of ancient betrayals. The air carried the sharp tang of pine and distant smoke, a harbinger of the confrontation she had glimpsed in her vision, the heart of the Frostfangs, where the temple's flame awaited, but first the ghosts of their pasts would rise to bar the way. Ilara's heart clenched, the Omega's empathy twisting into dread. She had seen the threads of treachery, Alaric's brother allied with a rival Alpha from the southern clans, their pact sealed in blood to unseat the ethical king who had chosen mercy over conquest. To reach the temple was to face them, to unearth the shame of her banishment and the weight of his fallen crown. As they crested a ridge, the valley floor unfolded in a tableau of lunar desolation. A frozen river snaked through the white expanse, its surface cracked like shattered oaths, flanked by a cluster of ancient standing stones etched with the goddess's runes. But the sanctity was shattered. Torches blazed in the distance, their flames guttering against the wind, encircling a makeshift encampment where shadows prowled like wolves denied their kill. Howls erupted, raw and triumphant, as sentries spotted them, the sound slicing through Ilara's resolve like claws through flesh. Alaric tensed, his hand finding hers in the snow, the touch a spark of warmth amid the encroaching cold. Denied no longer, yet fraught with the ethical precipice ahead. "Stay behind me," he growled, voice thick with the duty that had always defined him, but his eyes held a plea, the melancholy deepening as he faced the pack he had once led. Figures emerged from the firelight, his brother's hunters, furred cloaks stained with the night's pursuits, led by a hulking Alpha whose pelt gleamed with southern gold, Ragnar, the rival whose ambition had fueled the whispers of war. At their fore stood Kale, Alaric's kin, his face a mask of calculated betrayal, eyes cold as the river's ice. The air thickened with their scents, aggression laced with triumph, the metallic bite of drawn steel. "Brother," Kyle called, his voice echoing off the stones like a false benediction, stepping forward with a swagger that belied the guilt flickering in his shadowed gaze. "You flee like a cur, dragging an Omega's filth into our sacred wilds. The Council has spoken. Your mercy weakens us. Ragnar offers strength. Together, we reclaim the border's father lost." Ragnar flanked him, a beast of muscle and malice, his torque adorned with bones of fallen foes, lips curling in a sneer that promised violence. The pack murmured, their eyes shifting from Alaric to Alara, recognition dawning, the condemned one, her pendant glinting like a challenge under the moon. Alara's pulse roared, the vision replaying in visceral flashes. This moment. The crossroads where blood would decide. Her past surged unbidden, the judgment chamber's frost, the elder's condemnation, the alpha who had once claimed her heart, now standing silent among the hunters, his averted gaze a fresh wound. Shame burned in her chest, hot as the torches, but the pendant pulsed, urging her forward. She stepped beside Alaric, defying his protective stance, her voice cutting through the wind like a blade. "Your strength is a lie woven in jealousy," she said, eyes locking on the traitor who had whispered her doom. "I was cast out for seeing truths you fear, paths that spare the innocent, not bathe thrones in blood." Laughter rippled from the pack, cruel and jagged, but Alaric's hand tightened on hers, his ethical core flaring against the tide. "Kale, this ends the cycle," he said, voice resonant with the king's buried authority, guilt etching every word. "Father's death was no call to endless war. I chose peace to honor the lives lost, not weakness. Ragnar's gold blinds you to the goddess's will. Mercy crowns the true realm, not conquest." He drew his sword, the blade catching the moonlight in a silver arc, but his stance was not aggression. It was a stand for redemption, the melancholy in his eyes a mirror to her own fractured spirit. Ragnar lunged first, a blur of fangs and fury, his claws raking the air as the pack surged. Chaos erupted, steel clashing on stone, snow churning to bloodied slush under paw and boot. Alaric met him blade to claw, their duel a whirlwind of power and precision, each strike echoing the moral chasm. War's glory versus compassion's quiet strength. Ilara dodged a hunter's grasp, her bare feet slipping on ice, the cold seeping into her wounds like doubt's venom. Kale circled her, his betrayal personal now, eyes gleaming with the same fear that had doomed her. "You poison him, seer!" he snarled, lunging with a dagger drawn from his belt. "Your visions brought only chaos to the hollow. Now they'll drag my brother to ruin." She twisted away, the blade grazing her arm, warm blood welling to mingle with the pendant's ancient stain. Pain bloomed, sharp and real, but the old magic surged, the moon's light intensifying as if the goddess herself descended. Visions fractured the fray, paths diverging, Alaric fallen, his realm in flames. Or a union that healed the rift, forgiveness forging a new dawn. The choice clawed at her soul, freedom in flight, abandoning him to this judgment, or love's demand, intervening with her gift at the risk of exposure, of becoming the pawn in their wars. Her ex-alpha watched from the shadows, his silence a condemnation, stirring the raw ache of rejection. Was strength in walking away, preserving her fragile liberty, or in forgiving the betrayers through action, proving an Omega's worth beyond submission? Alaric faltered under Ragnar's onslaught, a gash opening across his shoulder, crimson spraying the snow like accusations. With a cry born of the heart's deepest fire, Alara thrust forward, hand outstretched toward Kyle. The pendant blazed, channeling her will. A burst of lunar light erupted from her palm, not destruction, but revelation, forcing visions into the traitor's mind. The southern invasion he courted, packs shattered, innocents' blood staining the moon. Cale staggered, horror twisting his features, the dagger clattering to the ice. The pack hesitated, howls faltering into uneasy silence, as the ethical weight pressed upon them. Ragnar roared, pressing Alaric back toward the river's edge, but Alara's choice crystallized: love over liberty, compassion over vengeance. She hurled herself into the fray, tackling Ragnar's flank with desperate fury, her nails raking his hide as the pendant's bloodied light wove a ward around Alaric. The rival Alpha reeled, blade glancing off stone, and Alaric surged, disarming him with a strike that echoed like thunder. Kyle knelt in the snow, broken by the sight, tears freezing on his cheeks. Forgiveness offered, not demanded, in the quiet space between strikes. The pack withdrew, shadows melting into the storm, leaving the valley scarred with blood and embers. Alaric pulled Alara close, his wounds seeping against her, their breaths mingling in ragged harmony. The moon watched, impassive, as she traced the pendant, its warmth a bridge across the chasm. Yet doubt lingered, a spiritual thorn. Had her intervention healed or merely delayed the war? Freedom slipped further from grasp, love's redemption demanding a final sacrifice. Could she truly forgive the past that bound them? Or would it rise again to claim its due? The dawn crept, pale and unforgiving, whispering of choices yet unmade. Dawn's first blush clawed at the horizon, painting the Frostfang Valley in hues of reluctant gold, as if the sun itself hesitated to witness the aftermath of blood and revelation. Alara leaned into Alaric's embrace, the warmth of his body a fragile bulwark against the encroaching chill, his wounds pressing against her like seals on a shared fate. The snow around them was a canvas of crimson streaks, the frozen river murmuring softly over the cracks where Ragnar's blade had nearly claimed more than territory. The pendant at her throat, its bloodied crescent etched with the night's fury, rested heavy against her skin, no longer pulsing but humming with a quiet finality, a symbol of paths chosen, wounds bared, and the rebirth that demanded everything. Her arm throbbed where Cale's dagger had grazed, the sting a visceral echo of the moral crossroads she had crossed. Compassion over flight, love's tether over solitary freedom. Yet as the wind sighed through the standing stones, carrying away the last echoes of howls, doubt coiled in her gut like frostbite's bite. Had her vision healed the rift, or merely cauterized a wound that would fester anew? Alaric's breath ghosted her temple, ragged but steadying, his scarred hand tracing the curve of her back with a tenderness born of survival's forge. The guilt that had shadowed him like a second cloak seemed lighter now, etched into lines of weary hope rather than despair, his ethical core, that unyielding choice for mercy over might, vindicated in the valley's hush. He pulled back slightly, cupping her face, his ember eyes searching hers under the moon's fading vigil. The silver torque at his neck caught the dawn's light, runes glowing faintly as if the goddess herself approved the union forged in storm and sacrifice. "You turned the tide, Alara," he murmured, voice a low rumble resonant with the melancholy of a king reborn. Not with claw or crown, but with the light they feared. Kyle's eyes. They saw the truth I could not force. The pack scatters, but seeds of forgiveness take root where war once bloomed. She searched his gaze, the pull between them no longer denied but embraced, a romantic fire kindled in tragedy's ashes. The old blood in her veins sang in harmony with his, the Omega's instinct transforming from resistance to acceptance, a rationalization shattered by the heart's unyielding truth. Love was no reward, but redemption's proof, a choice that healed the fractures of rejection and shame. Yet the spiritual weight pressed. Her ex-alpha's silhouette lingered at the valley's edge, a ghost of betrayal who had watched the fray without intervening, his silence a final judgment on her worth. Forgiveness, she realized, was not his to grant or withhold. It was hers to claim, in standing beside this alpha who saw her not as outcast, but as equal in destiny's weave. The pendant warmed once more, its bloodied chain a bridge across their scars, whispering that rebirth came not in isolation, but in union's quiet strength. Cale approached haltingly from the shadows, his form diminished, the traitor's swagger stripped away by the visions that had pierced his ambition. Snow dusted his furred cloak, and his eyes, once cold as glacial steel, now held the raw vulnerability of a soul confronted by its own darkness. Ragnar lay bound at the river's bank, subdued by Alaric's hunters who had emerged from the cliffs like lunar wraiths, loyal remnants drawn by the king's unbreaking ethic. The rival Alpha snarled, but his threats dissolved into the wind, his alliances crumbling under the weight of revealed paths. Kyle knelt before them, head bowed, the dagger's hilt offered in surrender. "Brother," he whispered, voice cracking like thin ice. "The southern gold blinded me. Father's ghost demanded vengeance, but your mercy, and her sight, show a realm worth more than conquest." Tears traced frozen paths down his cheeks, mingling with the bloodied snow, a baptism in the dawn's light. Alaric's hand tightened on Alara's, his melancholy softening into resolve, the guilt that had haunted him yielding to the redemptive arc of forgiveness. He extended his free hand, pulling Kyle to his feet, not as king to traitor, but as kin reclaiming the pack's fractured heart. "The cycle breaks here," he said, words carrying the weight of ancient oaths renewed. "War's blade cuts deepest the hand that wields it. We rebuild, not in blood, but in the goddess's flame." The standing stones seemed to hum in response, runes flickering as if the moon's essence lingered, blessing the choice. Alara's heart swelled, the ethical dilemma resolving in a visceral rush. Power was not domination, but the compassion to heal what was broken, to choose union over the solitude of old wounds. As the sun crested fully, bathing the valley in golden warmth that melted the frost from her lashes, Ilara felt the rebirth settle into her bones, a phoenix rising from exile's pyre. The pendant cooled, its bloodied symbol now a talisman of triumph. The crimson stain faded to a silver scar mirroring their shared healing. Alaric drew her close again, his lips brushing her forehead in a kiss soft as snowfall, the bond sealed not by instinct alone, but by the deliberate surrender to love's redemptive call. The pack gathered tentatively, eyes shifting from suspicion to awe, the Omega no longer condemned but revered as the pathfinder who had guided them through the storm. Her ex-alpha slipped away into the mist, a shadow dissolved by the light of her newfound strength, rejection transmuted into the freedom of self-forged destiny. In that moment, under the moon's watchful descent and the sun's ascending grace, Ilara understood. Every wound carried the seed of renewal. Every Omega's exile, a prelude to the throne of the heart. The wind carried a final distant uivo, not of pursuit, but of unity, echoing across the peaks as the Frostfangs stood sentinel to their renascent dawn. Strength was mercy's quiet flame, and in choosing it, they had crowned not just a king, but a realm reborn from the ashes of guilt and grace. If your heart beat alongside ours, comment and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.